This woman thought my farm road was a personal shortcut, so I taught her a lesson she'll never forget. Before this story begins, tell me in the comments, what's the worst thing your HOA or neighbor ever did to you? The first morning I woke up on my new farm felt like the world had finally stopped yelling at me. No phones ringing, no emails waiting, just sunlight slipping through the curtains and the sound of wind brushing against the trees outside. After 15 years working in an office full of deadlines, fake smiles, and endless meetings, I'd finally had enough. My name is Daniel Hayes, and I used to think success meant the tall building, a shiny badge, and a desk by the window. But success turned into stress, and stress turned into panic attacks and long, sleepless nights. So I sold my house, quit my job, and bought a small farmhouse at the edge of County Road 12, a quiet stretch of land surrounded by rolling green fields and the sound of cicadas in the summer. It wasn't fancy. The roof leaked a little, the barn was leaning to one side, and the porch creaked like it was whispering secrets. But to me, it was heaven. I remember standing on the porch that first week, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun rise over my fields. The light spilled across the grass in gold and orange waves, and I thought, this is it. This is peace. But peace doesn't last long when pride and power drive up in an expensive SUV. On the west side of my property sat a shiny planned community called Willow Ridge Estates. It looked like something out of a real estate magazine. Perfect lawns, sparkling fences, and people who seemed to measure happiness by how green their grass was. The neighborhood had an HOA, a homeowners association, and the folks there loved their rules more than their neighbors. One rule for paint color, another for mailbox height. Even the flowers in front yards had to be HOA approved. I didn't live under those rules. My farm was old land, private and separate from the community. My property line ended at a tall oak fence, the only thing dividing my open fields from their manicured streets. That's where I first saw Lila Preston. Lila was the kind of woman who always looked like she was walking into a meeting she already won. She had platinum blonde hair, sunglasses bigger than her face, and a sharp voice that could cut through concrete. Her husband Tom was quieter, always a few steps behind her, carrying things, nodding, agreeing. Everyone said the Prestons ran Willow Ridge. Lila was the HOA president, and Tom was the treasurer. They had a shiny two-story house, a wide driveway, and an SUV so clean it could blind you in the sun. The first time I noticed that SUV was a Tuesday afternoon. I was checking on the fence line when I heard the low growl of an engine behind me. I turned and saw her silver SUV bouncing down the narrow dirt path that ran between my fields. She wasn't supposed to be there. That was my property. She rolled her window down halfway as she passed, waving like it was a casual drive through a park. "Afternoon," she called out, not slowing down. I stared after her as the tires kicked up dust that settled on my crops. She didn't ask. She didn't apologize. She just drove through. At first, I told myself maybe she got lost. People take wrong turns, it happens. But the next day, she did it again. And the day after that. By the end of the first week, the tire tracks had carved 2 permanent lines through the edge of my field, right where the soil was softest. I found broken stalks, crushed grass, and the faint smell of gasoline where her car had been. I nailed up a simple private property sign at the end of the path. I made sure it was big, bold, and easy to see. The next morning, she drove by again, this time slower. She looked right at the sign, then at me standing by the barn with my hands on my hips. Her window slid down, and she smiled. "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Hayes. We've always used this way. It's part of the neighborhood easement." "Not anymore," I said, trying to keep calm. "This is my land. There's no easement on the deed." She tilted her head like I was a child who didn't understand the rules. "Well, I'm sure it's always been this way. I'll double check with the HOA." And just like that, she drove off again, her wheels throwing mud at my boots. That evening, I checked the county land records online. There was no easement. The driveway through my farm wasn't a road. It was just a path the other owner used for equipment. She had no right to be there. A few days later, I stopped by Willow Ridge's gatehouse to talk to the guard. I introduced myself, told him about the SUV cutting through my property, and asked if they could tell the resident to stop. He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, if it's Mrs. Preston, I can't really tell her what to do. She's kind of in charge here." That night, as I sat on the porch, the sound of her SUV echoed through the trees. Headlights flashed across my barn. I watched from the shadows as she sped through the path, leaving deep ruts in the damp soil. The next morning, I found footprints near my fence, hers probably, and a crushed row of early corn sprouts. The farm had always been my dream, but now it felt like a line was being crossed, one deep tire mark at a time. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, pick your battles, Daniel. But every time I heard that SUV rumble through, I felt something inside me boil. It wasn't just about the crops, it was about respect. I'd worked my whole life to finally own something that was mine, and now someone who didn't even live on my land was treating it like her shortcut. A week later, as I walked the fence at sunset, I found a piece of shiny plastic caught in the wire. A bit of her bumper probably from hitting one of the old fence posts. That's when I knew this wasn't going to stop on its own. The peace I had moved here for, the quiet mornings, the soft wind, the stillness, was already breaking apart, one tire track at a time. I looked out at the road disappearing into the fields and whispered, "If you won't stop, Lila Preston, then I'll make you stop the right way." The wind carried my words away, and the sun dipped behind the hills. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of her SUV echoed again, climbing the path that didn't belong to her. It was just the beginning. The next week started with rain. Not soft, gentle rain, but the kind that soaks through your jacket and turns the ground into thick brown mud. My fields needed water, sure, but what they didn't need were more tire tracks. When the clouds finally cleared, I walked the property with my boots sinking into the soft ground. The smell of wet soil filled the air. I followed a line of deep grooves running right through the middle of my corn rows, 4 perfect tire marks carving a path like someone owned the place. Lila Preston's silver SUV had been here again. The tracks curved down near the edge of the barn and back out toward the county road, tearing up 2 young rows of corn. I knelt down, pressed my hand into the wet mud, and felt my anger simmer. Every track felt like a personal insult, like she was saying my land didn't matter. I fixed the broken stalks as best I could and walked back to the house, wiping my hands on my jeans. The private property sign I'd posted a few days earlier was still standing, though it looked like someone had driven right beside it, splashing it with mud. The message couldn't have been clearer. She didn't care. That afternoon, I called my neighbor, Harold Brown, who lived a quarter-mile down the road. Harold was retired and spent most of his days working on old tractors or sitting on his porch with his dog. He lived in the area for 40 years and knew everything about everyone. When he showed up in his dusty pickup, he didn't even need me to explain. "Let me guess," he said, stepping out with a chuckle. "You're talking about that lady with the fancy SUV." "Lila Preston," I confirmed. "Yep, seen her go through your land twice this week. She doesn't even slow down." I sighed. "She says there's some kind of old easement. I checked my deed and didn't find anything." Harold spit into the dirt. "That woman would claim she owns the clouds if you let her. You stand your ground, Daniel. You've got every right." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure what to do next. I left city chaos to live simply, not to fight over dirt paths. Still, letting her win wasn't an option. 2 days later, I saw the SUV again. I was near the barn when I heard the familiar rumble of her engine. She came down the path at her usual speed, like she was driving through a parking lot instead of someone's farmland. This time, I stepped out in the middle of the road. Her tires slowed, spitting mud as she stopped a few yards away. The window rolled down with that soft electric hum, and Lila looked at me over her sunglasses. "Can I help you, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her tone polite but sharp. "You can stop driving through my property," I said. "There's no easement. You're trespassing." She smiled, not the kind smile you give a friend, but the tight, fake kind you see from people who think they're better than you. "Oh, Daniel," she said, like she was speaking to a child, "we've always used this route. The old owner allowed it." "The old owner didn't write it down. It's not legal. I've checked." She tilted her head. "Well, that's your opinion. I'll talk to the HOA board about it." "This isn't HOA land," I said. "This is my land. I don't pay your HOA dues, and your rules don't apply here." She gave a little laugh, the kind that said she wasn't listening. "Relax, Mr. Hayes. It's just a shortcut. You've got plenty of space." Then she rolled her window up, put the SUV in gear, and drove straight around me. The tires spun, splattering my jeans with mud as she disappeared down the path. That night, I barely slept. The wind howled outside, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smug smile and heard those tires ripping through my soil again. By morning, I'd made a decision. I called a lawyer. His name was Mr. Ellis, an older man with a soft voice but sharp eyes. His office was small, a one-story brick building in town that smelled like old paper and coffee. He listened carefully as I explained everything, then leaned back in his chair. "So, she claims there's an easement," he said. "Let's verify." He pulled out his laptop and started typing. After a few minutes, he nodded. "Your title shows no record of an easement, right-of-way, or shared access. The property boundaries are clear. You own that land fully. She's trespassing." I felt a wave of relief and anger all over again. "So what do I do?" "First," he said, "document everything. Dates, times, photos. Then send her a certified letter, politely but clearly telling her to stop. If she continues, we can file for damages or a restraining order." I agreed. Before I left, he gave me a folder full of papers and advice. "Be calm. Don't confront her again directly. Let the law handle it." I tried. I really did. For a week, I took pictures of every new tire track. I kept a little notebook in my truck, writing down the times she passed through. I mailed the certified letter myself, and I knew she received it. I saw her pick it up from her mailbox. But the next morning at 7:12 a.m., there she was again. I watched from the barn loft as her SUV slid down the same muddy path, the tires chewing through the soil like blades. She didn't even slow down to look at the new "No Trespassing" sign I'd posted next to the fence. She just drove by. Twice that day. By the weekend, she was back to her regular schedule, morning and evening. Same path, same smug look. Every pass felt like a message. You can't stop me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. Maybe she hadn't read the letter yet. But deep down, I knew the truth. People like Lila Preston didn't stop because of polite words. They stopped only when they had to. Sunday evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sun fade behind the ridge. The fields glowed orange and gold, and for a moment it almost felt peaceful again. Then I heard the rumble of her SUV. The peace shattered. Her headlights cut across the field like a slow, taunting wave. I stood up, fists clenched, but stayed where I was. Confronting her again would only make things worse. At least that's what I told myself. Still, I couldn't help but whisper into the dark, "You just don't get it, do you?" The engine faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of crickets and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked at the ruined path, the flattened stalks, the muddy scars slicing through what used to be my dream. Something inside me shifted that night. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. A quiet promise. If the law couldn't make her stop, I'd find another way. For a while, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I could just fix the tracks, replant the rows, and wait for her to get bored of cutting through my land. But the damage wasn't just to my soil anymore. It was starting to reach everything I cared about. The mornings on the farm used to start quiet, the rooster crowing, the smell of dew on the grass, my cows lowing softly in the distance. But lately, even the animals had changed. Every time Lila's SUV came rumbling down that path, they startled and bolted toward the far end of the field, eyes wide and tails swishing. My oldest cow, Bess, was the gentlest creature you could imagine, brown and white, calm as a summer pond. I'd raised her since she was a calf. But one morning, just as the sun was rising, I heard a strange bellow echo across the pasture. When I ran out to check, Bess was lying near the fence, breathing hard. Her left hind leg was scraped and her side was trembling. She'd tried to jump away when Lila's SUV came barreling down the dirt road. I could see the tire marks just feet from the pen. I knelt beside her, running my hand over her back, whispering softly, "It's okay, girl, you're okay." But she wasn't. The vet, Dr. Cooper, arrived an hour later in his old green truck. He was a tall man with a kind face, the kind that didn't need to say much for you to trust him. He examined Bess for a long time, his brow furrowing deeper each minute. Finally, he stood up and sighed. "She's going to live, but the stress, it's bad for her, especially since she was pregnant." I froze. Pregnant? I didn't... He nodded, gently patting the cow's neck. "She was a few months along, but the shock and strain, it's too much. She's miscarried." The words hit harder than I expected. I stood there, watching the vet pack up his tools, feeling hollow. Losing a calf wasn't just losing money. It was losing something you'd been waiting for, something that made the work feel worth it. The bill came to nearly $900, between the visit, medicine, and injections. I paid it, though it burned. But more than the money, I couldn't shake the image of that silver SUV flying past the pen like the world belonged to her. That evening, I printed another certified letter. This one wasn't just polite anymore. It was serious. It listed the property law codes, the damages, the cost of repairs, and the veterinary loss. I even attached the picture of Bess lying in the field, her body bruised and tired. The next day, I waited near the road. When the mail carrier pulled up to deliver it, I handed him the envelope myself. By sunset, Lila had it. I watched from my porch as she stood at her mailbox in Willow Ridge Estates, tore the letter open, scanned the first line, then ripped it in half. She crumpled it like trash, tossed it into her passenger seat, and drove off. I thought maybe she'd just head to work. But no, she came straight through my land again. She didn't just ignore me. She challenged me. Her SUV bounced through the same muddy path faster than ever, throwing up clumps of dirt like angry fists. I stood near the barn, fists tight at my sides, and whispered, "You're going to regret this, Lila." The next morning, I drove into town. The sheriff's office sat between a diner and a small hardware store, a square brick building with a faded flag fluttering out front. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and printer ink. I walked up to the front desk where a young deputy looked up from his computer. His nameplate read Carter. "Morning," he said. "What can I do for you?" I placed the folder on the counter, full of photos, notes, and copies of the letters I'd sent. "I need to report someone for repeated trespassing and property damage." He flipped through the photos, whistling softly. "That's a lot of tire marks." "And that," I said, pointing to one photo, "is one of my cows after she lost her calf because of the stress. She's driving through private land, ignoring signs, letters, everything." He looked sympathetic, but cautious. "We can take a statement, Mr. Hayes, but it sounds like what you've got here is mostly a civil matter. You'll probably need to handle this through a court. Property dispute, trespassing injunction, that sort of thing." I frowned. "You mean he can just keep doing this?" He hesitated. "Technically, we can warn her. If you catch her again, call us right away, but unless there's immediate danger,
It's up to the courts." The word courts landed heavy in my chest. Court meant lawyers, money, and months of waiting, all while my fields and animals suffered. "I can't wait months," I said quietly. "She's destroying my livelihood." The deputy gave me a kind look. "I get it, but we have to follow the law. Start by filing a civil complaint. In the meantime, keep documenting everything." So I did. For the next 2 weeks, I became part farmer, part detective. I took pictures every morning and evening, close-ups of tire tracks, wide shots of the paths, even timestamps from my trail cameras. I recorded videos from my phone whenever I saw her SUV cutting through. But she didn't stop. Sometimes she'd wave at the camera, that same fake, practiced smile, like she knew I couldn't touch her. Other times she'd honk at the cows, sending them scattering. Every day I fixed fences, replanted damaged soil, and told myself to stay calm. I was losing patience and hope. The farm that once felt like freedom now felt like a trap. The open land I loved so much suddenly felt smaller every day. Every sound, an engine, a horn, a crunch of gravel, made me tense. Even the animals were jumpy. My dog, Rex, barked every time he heard her car approach.
At night, I'd sit by the window, watching headlights flicker through the trees, praying it wasn't her. Most nights, it was. By the third week, I stopped feeling angry. I just felt tired. Tired of fixing fences, tired of being ignored, tired of fighting for the peace I'd already paid for. But even through that exhaustion, something inside me hardened. If the sheriff called it civil, then fine. I'd handle it civilly. But I wasn't about to let her destroy what I'd built. That night, I pulled out my notebook, the one filled with dates, photos, and receipts, and drew a small map of my land. I marked every entry point, every weak spot, every place she'd driven through. I didn't know what the solution was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The next time Lila Preston drove through my farm, something had to change. I looked out the window one last time before turning off the light. Her headlights cut across the far edge of the field, glowing like two eyes watching me. And as the sound of her SUV faded into the distance, I whispered to myself, "This is the last time you get to scare me, Lila." By the end of summer, the edges of my patience were gone. Lila Preston wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was daring me to stop her. Every morning, her silver SUV rolled down the same path like it owned the place. Sometimes she honked at the animals. Sometimes she didn't even slow down when I was nearby. The deep ruts across my land looked like scars that never healed. I tried everything I could think of. Fences, gates, chains, signs. Nothing worked. The first time I put up a gate, it was simple. 2 metal panels linked by a heavy chain. I thought it might make her finally realize she wasn't welcome. That hope lasted less than a day. The next morning, I found the chain on the ground, cut clean through. The gate hung open, swaying in the breeze. I stared at the broken links, my jaw tightening. She hadn't even tried to hide it. So I reinforced it. Thicker chain, stronger lock. A week later, that one was cut too. This time, she left the bolt cutters lying in the dirt, like a message. That was the moment I realized this wasn't carelessness or misunderstanding, it was war. I drove into town that same afternoon and parked in front of Mr. Ellis's law office. He was sitting behind his desk, glasses halfway down his nose, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. When he looked up and saw me there, he didn't even need to ask why I was there. "She did it again?" he asked quietly. I nodded, dropping the broken lock on his desk with a clatter. Cut right through. Twice. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and sighed. "You've given her notice, you've filed reports, you've documented everything. You're doing everything right. But until a judge issues a restraining order, the sheriff can only warn her." "I can't keep waiting," I said. "Every week she damages something else.
She's not scared of letters. I need a way to make her stop, permanently. Mr. Ellis looked thoughtful. You want a deterrent. Something that makes crossing your property, unpleasant. As long as it's legal, I said. He studied me for a moment, then pulled out a file from his cabinet. There are devices, retractable tire spikes, used in private lots and restricted areas. They don't hurt people, but they'll ruin a tire if someone ignores the warnings. They're legal on private property if you follow the rules. Clear signs, visible warnings, proper documentation, and police notification. Would it hold up in court? I asked. If you do it right, maybe. If you don't, you could be liable. The idea scared me a little bit. I wasn't a man who liked conflict, but I also wasn't about to let someone destroy what I'd built. So I spent the next few nights researching. At my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts, receipts, and maps, I made a plan. I read everything I could about property rights, signage laws, and vehicle deterrence. The plan had to be airtight. No room for her to twist it against me. I ordered a set of heavy-duty retractable tire spikes online, the kind used in gated facilities. They came in thick steel plates with reflective strips and warning stickers that said, "Stop, vehicle damage possible, do not enter." While I waited for them to arrive, I prepared the land. I used a post hole digger to plant bright yellow signs every 30 feet along the path. Each one had large red letters, "Private property, do not enter, trespassers will be reported." At night, I installed motion lights, powered by small solar panels, so even in the dark, anyone could see the warnings clear as day. Then, I mounted 2 new security cameras on tall poles, one facing the entrance and the other pointed directly at the middle of the path. Both cameras uploaded footage straight to the cloud, just in case anything went missing. By the end of the week, my farm looked like something out of a security manual. But I didn't stop there. I went over every photo and note I'd taken for months. The damaged crops, the broken gates, the injured cow, the vet bill. I organized it all into labeled folders. Tire track photos, 28 files. Property damage receipts, 11 items. Vet records for Bess, $900. Certified letters, 3 total. Police report, Sheriff Carter, date logged. I kept digital copies on a hard drive and printed backups in a binder. If anyone ever questioned me, I wanted to be ready. Mr. Ellis called me the night before the spikes arrived. "Remember," he said, "no surprises. You must notify the sheriff's office before you install anything. Make sure everything is visible, labeled, and clearly photographed. You're not trying to hurt her, just to make her stop." "I understand," I said. "I'll handle it carefully." He paused. "Daniel, people like Lila don't believe rules apply to them. Be ready for her to test you." "I'm already am," I said. The next morning, I drove into town again and met with Deputy Carter. He recognized me immediately. "Back again, Mr. Hayes?" I said. "Just keeping you in the loop. I'm installing a legal vehicle deterrent on my property. Retractable tire spikes, fully marked, warning signs everywhere. Cameras, too. I wanted to make sure it's documented before I activate them." He nodded, jotting notes into his pad. "You're being smart. As long as you've warned everyone and you're not hiding anything, you're within your rights. I'll add this to your case file." He looked up from his notes. "You really think she's going to ignore all that?" I gave a small, tired smile. "I think she's going to try. But this time, the road's gonna fight back." Back home, I set to work. The spikes were heavy, made of thick steel and rubber. I installed them carefully, one section at a time, making sure the release lever worked perfectly. When lowered, they sat flush with the ground, harmless. But when raised, the sharp points faced upward, ready to tear into any tire that crossed them. I positioned them in 3 rows, spaced apart along the dirt path. If she ignored the first sign, she'd hit the second. If she ignored that, the third would end it. When the last bolt was tightened, I stood back and looked at what I'd built. It wasn't anger that filled me this time, it was resolve. I took a slow walk along the path, photographing every sign, every spike, every camera angle. The evidence folder was already waiting for me inside. Then I wrote one final letter to Lila. Mrs. Preston, this is your last notice. You are trespassing on private land. I have installed vehicle deterrents that will cause tire damage if ignored. All warnings are posted clearly and documented. This notice has been shared with the county sheriff. Do not enter my property again. Daniel Hayes. I sent it by certified mail that evening, and as I stood by the mailbox watching the sun sink low behind the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control.
For too long, Lila Preston had treated my land like her driveway. But now, the ground itself would speak for me. The rules were clear, the warnings were posted, and the cameras were rolling. Whatever happened next wouldn't be my fault. It would be her choice. The morning it all came to a head started quiet. Too quiet. The air was cool, and a low fog clung to the fields like smoke after a storm. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the world felt still, almost waiting. I sat inside the barn office, a small wooden room I'd turned into my command center. On the table in front of me were 3 small screens, each showing a live camera feed from different angles of the path. One pointed toward the entrance near County Road 12, another faced the middle stretch where the first warning sign stood. The last one looked straight down the line of tire spikes I'd installed the week before. Everything was ready. I checked the spikes twice before sunrise, making sure each row worked perfectly and that the warning signs were still upright. The cameras were recording, and the sheriff's office had my notification on file. I even written the date and time in my notebook. Monday, 7 a.m. Observation begins. My dog, Rex, lay beside my boots, his head on his paws. He could feel my tension. Dogs always can. Every time the wind rustled the grass outside, his ears twitched. "Easy, boy," I whispered. "Let's see what she does today." At exactly 7:15, the first camera flickered. Motion detected. The silver SUV appeared at the top of the screen, rolling toward my fence line. I could see the sun bouncing off her windshield, turning it white. My heartbeat picked up. It was always the same. She came through at the same time, same speed, same route, like clockwork, like she was proving a point. She slowed slightly when she passed the first bright yellow private property sign. Not much, just enough to pretend she'd noticed it, and then gunned the engine again. The hum of her motor reached my ears through the barn walls. Rex lifted his head and gave a low growl. "She's here," I said softly, turning up the volume on the feed. The first pop came a second later. A sharp crack echoed through the morning air, loud enough to startle the birds from the fence posts. I leaned closer to the screen. The front tires had hit the first spike row, and a cloud of dust puffed out as she kept driving. She didn't stop. I watched, half shocked, half amazed, as the SUV rolled forward, wobbling slightly as both front tires began to deflate. The rims scraped the dirt, metal grinding against stone. The second pop followed, then another. By the time she reached the second spike row, her front tires were completely gone, rubber flapping like shredded cloth. Still, she kept going. I stepped out of the barn, phone in hand, the morning air cold against my face. The sound of the SUV struggling through the field was clear now. The whine of the engine, the squeal of rims on dirt, the hiss of air escaping what was left of the tires. Then came the final row, the third strip. When her back tires hit, the last 2 pops echoed like fireworks. The SUV lurched forward and then stopped dead in the middle of my property. Steam hissed from under the hood, and the faint smell of burnt rubber floated in the air. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, staring at the motionless vehicle. 4 flat tires, bent rims,
dust swirling around like smoke. I took a slow breath and said aloud, mostly to myself, "You did this to yourself, Lila." From the distance, I could see her inside the SUV, her hands gripping the wheel. The door opened, and she stepped out wearing a bright pink blazer, probably the same one she wore to every HOA meeting. Her sunglasses caught the light, hiding her eyes, but I could see the fury in her posture. She stomped around the car, shouting something I couldn't hear from where I stood. Her voice carried, though, sharp and angry, cutting through the calm morning. Rex barked once, but I held him back. "Stay, boy." I lifted my phone and began recording everything, just like Mr. Ellis told me to. No yelling, no threats, just proof. I zoomed in on the SUV, the signs, the tire spikes, the license plate, all of it. Then I dialed the sheriff. "This is Daniel Hayes," I said, keeping my tone steady. "The trespassing suspect I reported has just damaged her vehicle crossing into my property. She ignored all posted warnings. I need an officer dispatched." The dispatcher asked if anyone was hurt. "No, ma'am," I said, glancing at the feed. "Only her tires." By the time I walked toward the SUV, cameras still rolling, Lila had spotted me. "You!" she shouted, pointing across the field. "You set a trap! You could have killed me!" I stopped several yards away, close enough to hear her clearly, far enough to keep things safe. "Mrs. Preston," I said calmly, "I warned you in writing not to enter my property. The sheriff's office has a record of every notice." "You think you can scare me?" she snapped, stepping toward me in her heels, which were sinking into the mud. "This is an easement. You're breaking the law." "There is no easement," I replied, holding up my phone so it was clear I was recording. She froze for a second, realizing what that meant. Her eyes darted to the cameras on the poles, the signs, the ground littered with the remains of her tires. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. "I'll sue you. Then we'll let the court decide." A few minutes later, the sound of a siren echoed faintly down the county road. A patrol truck appeared, kicking up dust as it turned into my driveway. Deputy Carter stepped out, the same young man I'd met weeks ago. "Morning, folks," he said, taking in the scene with a slow whistle. "Well, that's quite the mess." Lila spun toward him, pointing furiously at me. "He did this on purpose. He's dangerous. Arrest him." Carter raised a hand. "Ma'am, calm down. Let's start with some questions." I handed him my phone and a printed folder, the same one with all my evidence. "Deputy, I notified your office in writing before installing the deterrents. Everything was marked, signed, and documented." He flipped through the papers, nodding as he compared them to the scene around us. "I see that. Signs everywhere. Cameras, too." Lila's voice rose now, desperate. "He's lying. There's an easement." The deputy cut her off gently. "Do you have paperwork showing that easement, ma'am?" She hesitated, her jaw tightening. "It's verbal." He scribbled something on his notepad. "Verbal easements don't count in property law, ma'am." The tow truck arrived next, its big metal arm glinting in the sunlight. The driver looked amused as he surveyed the SUV. "4 flats and bent rims. That's gonna be expensive," he said, half to himself. Lila stood by, fuming, while the deputy finished writing up his report. He turned to her one last time. "Mrs. Preston, you're being cited for trespassing and property damage. You'll get your vehicle back after you pay the tow and the fine." Then he turned to me. "Mr. Hayes, you handled this by the book. I'll add today's report to your file." I nodded. "Thank you, Deputy." As they towed her SUV away, I stood at the edge of the field, the morning sun finally breaking through the fog. For the first time in months, my land was silent. No engines, no shouting, no trespassing. Just wind, sunlight, and the sound of peace slowly returning. Rex pressed his head against my hand, tail wagging softly. I smiled, whispering, "It's over, boy. We did it." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end, not with someone like Lila. People like her didn't surrender easily.
and I could already feel that another storm was on the horizon. The sirens faded as the patrol truck rolled to a stop beside my field. Dust swirled around it, curling in the sunlight. Deputy Carter stepped out, the brim of his hat shading his eyes as he looked over the scene. Lila's silver SUV sitting lopsided in the middle of my land, all four tires flat and rims half buried in dirt. He whistled softly. "Well, Mr. Hayes," he said, resting his hands on his belt, "looks like it finally came to a head." Before I could speak, Lila Preston stormed toward him, waving her hands wildly. Her bright pink blazer was streaked with mud, and her hair, usually perfect, was sticking out in all directions. "Deputy!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Arrest him! He tried to kill me!" Carter blinked, calm as a pond. "Ma'am, let's slow down. Nobody's dead and nobody's hurt. Let's start with what happened." "What happened," she snapped, pointing straight at me, "is that this man set up a trap on his property. I drove down the same road I've used for years, and she gestured toward the shredded tires. He planted spikes. He destroyed my car. He could have..." "Could have what?" I said quietly, stepping forward just enough for her to hear me. "Could have made you stop trespassing?" Her mouth fell open, her face red. "You're insane. There's an easement. I have every right to use this path." Deputy Carter held up a hand. "All right, that's enough. Both of you, take a breath. I'll get both sides." He turned to me. "Mr. Hayes, let's start with you." I nodded and handed him the folder I'd been carrying since dawn. Inside were certified mail receipts, printed photos, copies of letters, and my property deed. "I documented every step," I said. "Every notice, every sign, every warning. I also notified your office in writing before installing the deterrents. You can check the date in your records." He flipped through the papers, eyes scanning the pages. The quiet clicking of his pen filled the space between us. "Looks thorough," he murmured. "And these are photos of the signs?" "Yes, every one of them was posted clearly, 3 along the entry path, plus reflective warning markers before the spikes." He nodded, then looked at Lila. "Mrs. Preston, do you have paperwork showing this easement you mentioned?" Her eyes darted side to side. "Not with me," she said quickly, "but there's always been one. The old owner let us use the road. Everyone knows that." Carter frowned. "Verbal permission isn't an easement, ma'am. If there's no written or recorded agreement, it's private land." She crossed her arms. "Well, I'll get my lawyer to prove it." "Of course," Carter said patiently, "but for now, it looks like you entered private property, ignored posted warnings, and damaged your vehicle in the process." Lila's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," he replied, flipping his notepad closed. "You're being cited for criminal trespassing." The moment the words left his mouth, she exploded. "You're siding with him? He's a lunatic. Look at what he did to my car." Carter didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, your car was damaged because you ignored multiple visible warnings. That's not his fault. That's yours." She stood there, trembling with anger, pointing at me like I was the villain in some story she'd invented. "You don't understand. He's been harassing me. I've lived here for years. He moved in and started putting up signs like some kind of outlaw." I folded my arms, keeping my tone steady. "I moved here for peace, Mrs. Preston. You brought the chaos." She opened her mouth again, but Carter's radio crackled, and he stepped aside to answer. I could hear the dispatcher's voice confirming that a tow truck was on its way. When he hung up, he turned back to her. "Tow company will be here in 15 minutes. They'll pull your vehicle out, but you'll need to pay the fee before they release it." Her face twisted. "How much?" He shrugged. "Depends on how stuck it is, but given those tires, probably around $800 to $1,000. She gasped. "That's robbery." He gave a small, almost amused smile. "No, ma'am, that's the price of ignoring a do not enter sign." As the tow truck arrived, the tension thickened. The driver, a big man with a sunburned neck, got out, took one look at the SUV, and let out a low whistle. 4 flats, all rims bent. Gonna be an expensive fix. You're lucky you didn't crack the axle. She didn't respond. She just stared at her car like it had betrayed her.
While the driver hooked chains to the undercarriage, Carter turned back to me. "Mr. Hayes, I'm adding today's incident to your case file. Do you wish to press charges for trespassing and property damage?" For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to let it go, to finally breathe again. But then I thought about Bess, my cow, losing her calf because of Lila's carelessness. I thought about the broken gates, the ruined crops, the endless disrespect. "Yes," I said, finally, "I do." Carter nodded, writing it down. "All right, I'll file it with the county attorney. You'll be notified when it's processed." As the tow truck pulled the SUV up the ramp, Lila stood there, nearby, her arms folded tight. The sound of metal chains scraping against steel made her flinch. "You're making a huge mistake," she said bitterly. "You don't know who you're dealing with. The HOA won't stand for this." I almost laughed. The HOA doesn't own my land, and they don't own the law. She turned to Carter. "Can I go now?" He nodded slowly. "Once the vehicle's secured, you can arrange a ride home from here." She pulled out her phone, muttering angrily under her breath. Carter watched her for a moment, then turned back to me. "You handled this by the book, Daniel. I wish every property dispute went this clean." "Clean?" I asked with a small, tired smile. "Doesn't feel clean. Feels like months of being pushed to the edge." He sighed. "Sometimes doing things right still doesn't feel good. But trust me, the paper trail matters." He tore a pink slip from his notepad and handed it to me. "This confirms the report. Keep it for your records." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. When the tow truck finally drove away, Lila stood there alone, arms crossed, watching it disappear down the dirt road. For a brief second, her anger seemed to falter, replaced by something like disbelief. Maybe it was the first time she realized she wasn't untouchable. Then she turned to me, her eyes burning. "You're not over," she said through clenched teeth. I met her gaze. "You're right. It's not. But next time, it won't be me you're dealing with. It'll be the court." She glared one last time, then walked off toward the road, her heels sinking into the mud with every step. The field was quiet again. Just me, Rex, and the faint hum of insects in the warm air. I looked at the deep ruts her tires had carved into my land and sighed. It would take weeks to smooth them out, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The law was finally on my side. I reached down, scratched Rex behind his ears, and said softly, "Come on, boy, let's clean this mess up." We walked back toward the barn as the sun climbed higher, burning through the last of the morning haze. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was justice, and that was a good start. Word travels fast in small towns. By the end of that week, everyone from the diner waitress to the gas station clerk knew what had happened between me and Lila Preston.
It started as whispers. "Did you hear about that lady from Willow Ridge who drove into spike strips?" and spread like wildfire through every neighborhood chat, Facebook group, and community newsletter. Even people I didn't know started waving at me from their trucks as they passed my driveway. Some nodded in approval, others just smiled like they knew a secret. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. But while I went back to mending fences and replanting what she'd ruined, the chaos was just beginning for Willow Ridge Estates. A few days after the incident, someone from the HOA board, a man named David Lang, the vice president, reached out to me. He was polite, nervous even. "Mr. Hayes," he said over the phone, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened. That shouldn't have gone on this long. Lila's behavior, it doesn't represent our community." "I appreciate that," I told him. "I'm just glad it's over." He hesitated. "Well, about that, there's more. People are asking questions, not just about the trespassing, but about how she's been running things here. Let's just say her little accident made a few people start looking closer." I didn't think much of it at first. HOA's always had drama. But then, a week later, the real story broke. The Maple County Herald, our local paper, ran a front-page headline that read, "HOA President Under Investigation for Misuse of Community Funds." The article laid everything out. Receipts, credit card statements, transactions. Turns out, Lila hadn't just been overstepping property lines, she'd been dipping into the HOA's budget for personal expenses. The list was embarrassing. $1,200 spent on office decor that turned out to be new furniture for her living room. $800 on community hospitality, a fancy dinner at a steakhouse for her and Tom. $400 for beautification supplies that somehow became new flower beds in her yard. David Lang had apparently grown suspicious after seeing Lila approve multiple payments without board votes. When the news of her trespassing hit, he decided enough was enough and asked for an audit. The auditor's report confirmed it. Thousands of dollars misused. The fallout was swift. Willow Ridge's residents held an emergency meeting. It was standing room only in their community clubhouse, every chair filled, every voice buzzing with anger. According to David, who later stopped by to tell me how it went, the meeting was a disaster for the Prestons. Lila tried to deny everything at first, blaming clerical mistakes and misunderstandings. But when the auditor displayed copies of her signed receipts on the projector, her excuses fell apart. Tom, her husband, just sat in the back of the room, face pale and eyes down. By the end of that night, the HOA voted unanimously to suspend Lila and open a criminal complaint. Tom stepped down from his treasurer position the next morning. The Prestons' perfect suburban image had cracked wide open. Meanwhile, my case moved forward, quietly but steadily. When the court date came, I dressed neatly. Jeans, clean boots, pressed shirt, and brought my binder of evidence. Lila sat across the courtroom, her hair pulled back tightly, jaw clenched. Her lawyer did most of the talking, arguing that she'd been unaware of the property lines and didn't intend harm. But the judge wasn't buying it. I watched as the deputy presented my photos, videos, letters, and the sheriff's report. Every sign, every warning, every step I'd taken proved one thing. She knew exactly what she was doing. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was firm but calm. "Mrs. Preston," he said, "you received multiple written warnings, official notices, and police contact regarding your actions. You ignored them. This was not a misunderstanding. This was willful trespassing." Her face went red, and she muttered something under her breath. The judge continued, "You are hereby found guilty of criminal trespassing and property damage. You will pay restitution for the documented losses and complete 1 year of probation. You are also ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Hayes' property at all times." The gavel struck once, echoing through the small courtroom like thunder. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just felt relief. Quiet, deep relief that maybe, finally, the storm was ending. When we left the courthouse, she avoided looking at me. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she brushed him off, storming towards her car. As she opened the door, I called out, "Lila?" She froze, but didn't turn around. "I didn't want it to end like this," I said simply. "I just wanted you to stop." She slammed the door without saying a word. The sound echoed down the courthouse steps long after she drove away. Over the next month, things slowly returned to normal. The fields grew green again, the animals relaxed, and I could finally wake up to quiet mornings without the sound of engines tearing through the land. One afternoon, I was fixing a fence post when David Lang's truck pulled into my driveway. He climbed out, carrying a small basket of apples and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "I thought you'd like to see this," he said, handing me the paper. It was another article from the Herald. "Former HOA president pleads guilty, ordered to repay $14,000. Lila's photo was beneath the headline. Tired eyes, forced smile, the shine gone from her perfect suburban image. "She's moving out," David said. "They're selling the house. HOA voted to ban her from ever serving on a board again." I nodded slowly. "Guess everyone learned something." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, some people learn the hard way." After he left, I sat on the porch with Rex, reading the article one more time. The late afternoon sun painted the fields gold, the kind of light that makes everything feel cleaner somehow, like the world is setting things right again. In the distance, the road stretched quiet and empty. No more tire tracks, no more shouting, just peace. I thought back to that first morning I moved here, when I bought this land to escape noise and stress. It had taken months of fighting and frustration, but now, sitting there with the dog at my feet and the fields whispering in the wind, I finally had what I came for. Peace, the kind that can't be bought, borrowed, or bullied away. I closed the newspaper, leaned back in my chair, and smiled softly. Justice had a way of finding its own path, even when it had to drive over a few spike strips to get there. The first morning after everything ended, the farm felt different. Not louder or quieter, just lighter, like the air itself had been scrubbed clean. For the first time in months, I woke up to the soft sound of wind through the trees instead of engines growling across the fields. The sunlight spilled through the window, and I sat there on the edge of my bed for a long moment, listening. No shouting, no horns, no chaos. Just the gentle rhythm of a place finally healing. Outside, the world was greening again. The late spring rain had come at just the right time, helping the soil recover where the tires had cut deep. Rows of new crops were already sprouting, small green shoots pushing through the earth like promises kept. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, Rex trotting at my heels. The air smelled of wet grass and clean soil, the scent of peace. "Looks like we made it, boy," I said softly, scratching behind his ear. His tail wagged as if to agree. Over the next few weeks, I poured myself into rebuilding what had been broken. I repaired the fences that had fallen, straightened every post, and replaced every section that had been bent or splintered. Then I went one step further. I built a new, sturdy fence line, thicker and taller, stretching the full length of the western border near Willow Ridge.
It wasn't out of anger. It was out of finality. That line, that solid wooden wall, meant I'd never have to deal with another SUE or entitled neighbor treating my land like their shortcut again. The work was hard, but it felt good. Sweat on my back, hammer in my hand, the steady rhythm of nails hitting wood. Every strike was a reminder that I was putting my life back together on my own terms. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at it. Strong, clean, straight. A line of peace drawn in wood and wire. The spike strips, the ones that had ended it all, I cleaned them carefully, oiled the hinges, and locked them away in the barn's storage room. They sat there on a metal shelf, tucked between an old toolbox and a stack of feed sacks. I hoped I'd never need them again. They weren't something I was proud of, but I wasn't ashamed either. They were a tool, a reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't mean fighting dirty. It means being smart, patient, and prepared. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a shout. Sometimes it comes with proof. One afternoon, Deputy Carter stopped by the farm on his patrol route. His truck rumbled up the driveway, and I met him by the gate, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Fence looks solid," he said, nodding approvingly. "Built to last," I replied with a small smile. He leaned against his truck and took off his hat. "Just wanted to check in. Court records are closed now. Lila's probation terms are active, and she's not allowed within 100 yards of your property. You shouldn't have any more trouble." "Good to hear. I think she's done causing trouble for anyone." He chuckled. "I heard she and her husband sold their house. The HOA replaced it with someone new. Guy named Lang. He's been pretty respectful. David, he's a good man." Carter smiled faintly. "You handled this the right way, Daniel. Most folks would have lost their temper. You kept it clean, and that made all the difference." I shrugged. Didn't always feel clean, but I couldn't let anger win. You can't outshout people like her. You just have to outlast them." He nodded. "That's the kind of lesson more people need to learn." Before he left, he turned and said, "Take care of yourself, Mr. Hayes. You did right by the law, and by yourself." When his truck disappeared down the road, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, the kind of quiet you earn. That night, I sat out on the porch again with Rex at my feet, the stars bright above the fields. The cicadas hummed softly in the distance, and a cool breeze carried the smell of fresh hay through the air. I thought about everything that had happened: the shouting, the courtrooms, the broken gates, the spike strips. It all felt so far away now, like a story that belonged to someone else. I'd come here to escape the noise of the world, but it turned out even peace has to be protected sometimes. Not with fists or fury, but with boundaries, truth, and patience. I'd learned that standing up for your rights doesn't mean losing your integrity. It means knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to let the evidence do the talking. If I'd fought her with anger, I might have lost everything: my reputation, my land, maybe even my freedom. But instead, I fought with facts. I documented. I stayed calm. I trusted the system, even when it felt slow. And in the end, the truth spoke louder than any shouting ever could. Sometimes I drive past the old entrance to Willow Ridge. They've built a new decorative gate there now, iron and stone, with a camera mounted above it. I guess they learned something from this too. Once in a while, a new neighbor waves at me from the other side of the fence. I wave back, polite and friendly. No grudges, no hate, just distance, the good kind. The land is quiet again. The crops are full, the animals healthy, and the days easy. I start each morning with a walk across the field, the sun rising over the hills, painting everything gold. It's funny. Peace doesn't look like much. It's not fireworks or applause. It's the sound of the wind in the grass, the smell of soil after rain, the steady rhythm of life going on the way it should. That's worth more than anything money can buy. Before heading in that night, I turned one last time toward the fence line. The new boards gleamed faintly under the moonlight, strong and straight, a line of peace drawn in wood and wire. I took a slow breath and smiled. "Some lessons are hard," I said softly, mostly to myself, "but the ones that cost you the most usually stick the longest." Rex barked once, as if agreeing, and we walked back toward the house. The porch light glowed warm against the dark, a beacon of calm in a world that never really stopped spinning. As I shut the door behind us, I looked back one more time at the land through the window, the place that had tested me, taught me, and finally given me what I'd been searching for all along. Peace. Honest, hard-earned peace. And as the night settled over the farm, I realized something simple but true. Sometimes the best kind of victory isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and yours forever. This chapter might be over, but stories like this happen every day. People who think rules don't apply to them, and neighbors who finally stand up. So what would you have done if you were Daniel? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.